Good morning, everyone. If you would be seated, we'll begin the meeting. Do we have any visitors with us today? Good morning. Okay. Do we have any visitors with us today? This is the first time you've been with us. Would you raise your hand? Thank you so much for coming. And by the way, there's a membership form in the middle of your table. And there's no charge to join. We'd be glad to have you. Also, would you take a moment and fill in the yellow form in the center of the table for your name, address, phone number, and that way we can keep in touch with you. And also, you'll find a survey on your table. If you would fill that in before the end of the meeting, that would be helpful. We always like to know of suggestions so that we can present information to you that's relevant. I would like to introduce the staff today. We have Michelle Voth is our Executive Director, Prevention Recovery Services. Lynn Smith, he's the Community Prevention Consultant. Michaela Butterworth, Education and Communication Specialist in the back. And I'm Judy Wilson, Office Manager and National Night Out Program Coordinator. If you have any questions, just look us up and we'll be glad to help you. We'll move right along today so we can have more time for our panel. The December minutes were sent to you, were emailed to you, and also placed on the table. And I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes. A motion and a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The minutes have been approved. On the staff update, it includes upcoming meetings. We have the retailers on February the 12th, the IFO meeting on the 20th of February. Next Safe Streets Coalition is right in here, March the 4th, and we do have a Safe Property Management on the 4th, and the property management is March 24th, and this is for landlords, apartment managers, apartment maintenance. So it's a really good training to attend. If you'll turn to the second page on your agenda, you'll find the program report, and this goes through December to February since we did not have a meeting in January. You'll notice that we are beginning to have Neighborhood Watch contact us, either to start one or to have their monthly or annual meeting. We also did presentations, and that's really going full force too. We had presentations under the substance abuse as well as crime prevention. You'll also notice on the Latino initiatives, we're beginning to have presentations there as well. We do not have a champion of character today due to illness, but she will be with us at our March meeting. Sergeant Burns, would you come up for the Topeka Police Department to present the crime stats?
All right, it's good to be back. We'll go over the city violent crime first. The difference in January from last year to this January, we are down most of the violent crime there. For the city property crime, we're also down. I do want to highlight the theft vehicle break-ins are up. Just remind people that we need to be locking our vehicles at all times, even overnight. Most of our guns stolen out of cars are just from vehicles that have down windows. The vehicles are unlocked at night, and using Ring doorbells and security cameras, we'll see people, all they're doing just going up and down the street just checking doors. They're not looking to break a window, they're not looking to damage vehicles, they're just gonna check a door handle and move on. So we gotta remind ourselves to be able to lock our vehicles properly, remove items out of line of sight, and then also be mindful of bumper stickers or any kind of stickers we're putting on our vehicles. What kind of advertisement are we saying to the public? Because the bad guys do look at those items as well. So for the community unit, we've kind of changed how we're doing a lot of our meetings. We used to go to a lot of the NIA, NA meetings every month. We're kind of switching it up to quarterly meetings for each zone in the city based on the police department's patrol zones. If you don't know what zone that meeting would take place in, email myself or Sergeant Dan Wilson will get you squared away. So we started them this week. We're up at Garfield Community Center on Monday. Last night we're at the library. We'll be at Hillcrest Community Center tonight at 6:30, and then Crestview Community Center at 6:30 as well. These are set up as a town hall meeting. It's our entire outreach bureau will be there, all the community officers, also animal control, property maintenance, neighborhood relations, U.S. Census has been there as well, PARS and Safe Streets are there as well. So it's an opportunity for a lot of the community outreach teams to be in one building, set up a town hall meeting, and then any questions you guys may have for any entity that, for services that are provided to the public, you guys can ask. And then this Saturday is Polar Plunge already. If you guys haven't been out there, it's a great time. We are anticipating it to be a little colder this year, which is always good. I enjoy the faces coming out of the lake. And it's for a great cause. We always like to support our athletes with Special Olympics, and this is the first of many events we're going to have for the year. That, I believe, is it.
Sheriff Brian Hill for the Sheriff's Office.
What you're looking at is the initiatives that we have rolled out the last year from the Sheriff's Office, the Drug Enforcement Task Force, the Interdiction Task Force. We started back up the U.S. Marshals Task Force with an operative from the Sheriff's Office. Our drone program has turned out to be a very successful crime-fighting tool. We did do some cross-deputization across the county line into Jackson County. Helped our investigators work a little better across that county line with a lot of investigations, and we're finding a lot of stolen property moving back and forth across the county line to our neighbors to the north. The proximity dispatch has been helpful, and that's simply where closest officer or deputy to a priority 1 crime will now be dispatched, which is providing better services for the citizens. We have a Sherwood Outpost that is due to open here, I hope by the 11th. That's where we're running our intermittent deputies. It went from a reserve program into a part-time deputy program. That outpost is going to provide us a little better availability to serve people way out southwest. It's a long way down to the station from out there. It gives the deputies a place they can do reports, citizens a place they can come in and file reports, and we hope to have that manned and operational here shortly. Due to actually some citizens purchasing some canines, we were able to add 2 new canines to the Sheriff's Office, and those dogs are becoming a very good asset for us. We also partnered with the Kansas Search and Rescue, and the difference is the dogs that they have there are scent specific. So like police dogs are multi-utilization dogs. They can take down bad guys, they can trail, but it's usually just last scent. So if that is a contaminated trail, those police dogs have trouble following that. These dogs will be on 1 scent, so walkaways, elderly people, some of these runaway kids. Those dogs are scent specific, so they, no matter who crosses that trail, and sometimes even days old trails, these dogs can run. We went out and they gave us an actual demonstration of the dog's capabilities, and that was a very good partnership back with us. And so now dispatch has their numbers, and these ladies that are doing that simply donate their time and train the dogs. I was very impressed with them. We've started a criminal intelligence analyst position. I know PD's had one for years. Looking at things at Sheriff's Office, that was a spot where we needed to up our game, and now we have an individual there that's that's doing that and coordinating with PD and a lot of the agencies around the county. And we've also started a new tactical medicine medic program. We were lucky enough that we had a guy came over from the ambulance, and he was certified to do a lot of stuff when we hired him as a deputy. And so when I met with him, he wanted to keep the certifications up. I thought that was a great asset for the sheriff's office. And now we've added some more training, so we're adding to the tactical medic program. We have a doctor that's on staff now on call for us. And what it allows these guys to do is actually some upper level medical procedures in critical incidents that's well above just the basic first aid. So that's a very good program. We can go through these pretty fast. This is just Drug Enforcement Task Force, and we had most of the chiefs of police all through the county sign up, and this is turning out to be a very good program. We're sharing criminal intel on the drugs that are flowing through Shawnee County. So I'll have some stats later on, but our drug arrests are up more than 3 times here in the county since we've started implementing this. So very happy with everybody who signed up and come on board with this. And again, this is just narcotics arrests and gun seizures have tripled since this task force was created. And honestly, this task force has been operational probably 4 to 5 months. It took a couple of months to get up and running, get everything integrated. So I look for those numbers to just keep getting better and better here in the county. This interdiction task force, honestly, the sheriff's office has 2 of the better interdiction guys that have run the highway for years. We've partnered with Rossville PD, who have some good interdiction folks out there. We did purchase our guys a tag reader, which they've been operating off of without one for years. Just this year, 702 vehicle stops, $191,340 that they've seized. They've searched 109 vehicles, 16 arrests, and they've seized 6 vehicles. And they've seized large quantities. When they get loads, it's not a gram of this and that, it's several pounds of things they're knocking off on the highway. This Operation Safe Zone, this is a good operation. I'm pretty proud of this. This is a lot of the agencies, 501, Washburn PD. What we did was we put a geo fence in our computer system and identified everybody who had warrants around the school, and then we all worked together to go out and serve a lot of those warrants. This weekend alone, they did 63 warrants served, and they arrested 52 individuals that I would consider to be threat level around those school areas, and we're going to continue to partner with our policing chiefs from 501 and Washburn and keep going around those schools. It's just budgetary. It takes money to do those operations, but we're going to continue to roll those out. Our unmanned aerial system drone program is turning out to be a good utilization of this. We added 3 drones. You can buy those things fairly reasonable now. The drones that we have infrared capabilities, so when they put them up in the air at night, they have heat signatures. You can see who's moving below. At about 100 feet, you can't even hear that thing, so it's pretty stealthy to run in areas where we need to check for high vehicle break-in, residential break-ins. They've made a few arrests. One of the ones that hit the media was they showed up and a church had been broken into out here, and they put it up in the air and found a guy just laying out in the middle of a field at 3 a.m. in sub-zero temperature. So we call that a clue in police work. So they was able to get that guy and arrest him. They've also very proud of the fact I tasked these guys with using this in police and just normal policing duties to make things a little safer. Felony car stops, once you get everybody out of the car, you still have to clear that car. And it used to be just an officer walking up looking in. So now flying that drone around to make sure that's clear, it's just safer. We've embedded the drone operators with our SWAT team so that when the SWAT team is activated, they put that thing in the air over whatever target they're heading for and gives them real-time information. Because You know, I did that a lot of years, and walking up on a house with a guy bailing out the back window, you might not know till it's almost too late. So these guys just keep finding more ways to utilize that drone. Right now, we have 8 operators. Usually at about every shift, somebody's got one of those in the trunk of their car, and they can deploy that thing within minutes, as opposed to having to drive an hour there and back to the station to get one. So the capabilities of this program is just growing. I believe it will continue to develop. Here's our Sherwood outpost. It's just a little office area out there that our guys can actually operate out of, and again have a point of operations that is farther out southwest, so we can better serve that area of the county. So, and, all right, I think that's it. All right.
Thanks, Chief. I am Michelle Voth, Director of Prevention and Recovery Services. A couple months ago, I met with Chief Cochran, and we discussed, some ideas of what he was particularly interested in for topics. And we also take responses from all of you, what kind of things you want to hear about. Last summer, we did something on opioids, and we thought it was timely to talk about marijuana and the impact it has on this community and our state. So I'm going to share just a few statistics, and then I want to bring up our panelists that will give you a broad perspective of how marijuana is impacting. Right now, according to the the Communities That Care survey, which is done across the state and every year school student survey, a little over 6% of youth from 6th grade to 12th grade report using marijuana at least once in the last 30 days. But we know that use increases from 6th grade. It's only 1.3%, but that's doubled from last year. 8th grade, it's more than twice the state average at 6%, and 12th grade, it's at 12% on at least once in the last 30 days. Perception of harm is another thing that impacts youth, and what we're seeing here is that youth report that there's little or no harm to the using of marijuana. And in fact, in 6th, 8th, and 10th grade, the reports from those that respond to the survey in Shawnee County, our rates are higher than the state average as well, ranging from 18% of 6th graders that say there's no risk at all for using marijuana regularly, to 19% in 10th grade, and again 19% in 12th grade. So today, I'm really excited. We've got a great panel who represent different sectors, and they will come talk about, from their perspective, what they're seeing. So I'd like to ask the speakers to come up. Officer Kelsey Grobman from Narcotics Division with TPD. Officer Marcus Scheid, who is with the Shawnee Heights School District, and he's a school resource officer. And just take a seat. Kevin Kufeld is with us. He's a program manager from the Adolescent Center for Treatment in Johnson County, and that is the only inpatient treatment center we have for youth in the state. Dr. Eric Voth, he's with Vice President of Primary Care, Stormont Vale Health. I kind of know him a little bit for a few years. Katie Wisman, who is with KBI, and anyway, I'd like you to give a round of applause for the speakers. You're going to hear a lot from them, and Kevin for driving up today. So, and I would be remiss if I didn't say, "Yay, Chiefs!" I'm sorry, I wanted to say that. I don't wear red often, but I had to today. So, anyway, I'm from Kansas City. First of all, I'd like Officer Krogman to talk about how marijuana use is impacting TPD and crime in the community here, from your perspective. And
we did a small study recently over the last few years looking at our homicides, and it does show that there's a relationship between marijuana use and the number of homicides that we have. Other narcotics are also seen in that study. Kansas is kind of a unique position because we're in between two states. One's recreational and the other's medicinal. So our patrol officers do see a lot of that carryover from those states as well. Missouri's fairly new in their legalization, but it has impacted the crime that we see on the street and the way officers are doing business.
Officer Stein, you're working in the schools, so you see kids, what is it, middle school, high school?
High school.
High school.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and use and how it relates to perception and what you're seeing the impact.
Okay, to kind of give you guys a little background, I'm at Shawnee Heights High School, about 1,165 students in that high school. That's kind of my primary responsibility there. Been out there 8 years. During that time, I've seen quite a bit of climate change in terms of, initially it was alcohol, tobacco issues. Now we're into the vape, we're into the marijuana. Seeing quite a bit of that, I would say, at the high school. Also trickled down into a little bit of the middle school, seeing that, and also at the elementary school on rare occasion. But really, when I get out into the classrooms, speaking with the kids, it's almost kind of a norm. For some of those students and kids, they see that smoking marijuana and using marijuana much like using tobacco, much like alcohol. So part of that, I think, is educating the youth, and there's a lot of misnomers out there about marijuana not bad for you. I think the kids kind of feel that. So we're seeing a little bit of misconception on that end, trying to educate them that it is. There are issues with that. There are effects that not only affect learning at school, the environment. A lot of the kids, come to school and have that mindset that it's okay. So trying to change that and educate our kids to understand that there is an issue. It's bad for you, and there are long-term issues associated with that, especially in the learning environment.
Kevin, you see kids in treatment.
Correct.
And so I'm curious about what you're seeing and what impact you're seeing with the kids and what marijuana is looking like for the kids that are using in treatment.
First off, Michelle, thank you very much for the invite and the ability to come up here and chat with all of you. Being as though ACT is the only residential program in the state, I have a great cross-sectional of the entire state of Kansas, from youth coming from western Kansas to central Kansas to even over in Johnson County and even down south in the Pittsburgh area too. So youth coming to our facility, primarily, I'd say about 90% of them have a marijuana use disorder as well. But then we have a lot of co-occurring disorders with mental health, and then also some of the codependency on some of the opioids and methamphetamine. We're starting to see an increase in benzodiazepines, but marijuana is one that's pretty much a staple for us at ACT. When we look at the average age of first use in the state of Kansas, average age is about 12 years old. And when I have my youth in treatment, I always do kind of a random sampling of kids. And the youngest I have right now was 6 at his first use. And then the oldest was about 16. So but as we kind of ball them all up together, they range about 12 years old. When we talk about the impact of marijuana use on these kids, as you hear the deputy here talking about, that we see the impact not only on their cognitive and executive functioning, but just their memory and their ability to retain information. I was looking through this fact sheet here, and if I had some of the youth with me today, they'd just be sitting there shaking their head, yes, this is me. Whether it's my emotions, whether it's my memory, my academic functioning, my legal system involvement, we see marijuana use kind of infiltrating these young minds of these kids. And as the potency levels begin to increase, we're seeing more and more deficiencies. And I think it's always important when I'm out educating with adults and administrators and law enforcement and hospitals, it's always important for me to make sure that I'm referencing the fact that nowadays, kids are not only smoking marijuana. And if you ask them if they're smoking marijuana, they may even tell you no, because now they're vaping marijuana. And they make this very clear delineation between smoking versus vaping. And we're running into cases where kids in school, they're not even carrying their own devices. They're carrying around a cart with them. And they've got these cartridges, and their buddy walks up to them, they hand them the device, they pop it in, they take a hit, they give it back, and now they don't have the device on them, but they do have their cartridge. we're seeing these potency levels upwards of 80, almost venturing to guess maybe 90%, but I'd say 80% is a pretty safe bet on some of these oils and some of these concentrates that the kids are using nowadays. And, and I know Dr. Vose is here, he'll probably talk about the medical implications here, but just seeing some of the impact that these young individuals with PTSD and bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, we're seeing this increase in some of these psychotic features that, that may not have been exhibited before, but now we're seeing an increase in those as well. So I see these youth coming in kind of at the worst of the worst. Many of them are coming from jail, maybe some of them from their home environments where the impact on their use has just kind of dropped them to their knees. And by about that third week of treatment, you start to see they're brightening up a little bit, they're sleeping a little bit better, they're starting to eat a regular diet, they're gaining some weight, and they're starting to enjoy life a little bit more. They're showing some life to them. But just watching these kids walk in the door with this severe addiction to what could be many consider not to be a harmful or an addictive product, they're stuck and they're addicted and they struggle with sleep and eating, and they will verbalize withdrawal symptoms of irritability and sleeping problems and hunger problems. So it's not the marijuana of the 60s and 70s of, you know, maybe 3 to 4% THC levels. We're talking very high potency marijuana, and it's getting higher and higher as, you know, we're starting to get states such as Colorado and Missouri with the legalization of THC. So much more we're going to be talking about, but that's just kind of an introduction as to what we're seeing at the residential level.
As you were talking, I do have a question.
Yes.
What does it cost approximately for one student to go through treatment?
Okay, so many of our youth come to us that are on Medicaid or, you know, they're grant funded through a federal grant dollars, which is a Beacon Health Services. We do take some private pay and private insurance. On average, if you are paying full fee from out of county, it's about $345 a day, which roughly comes to about $9,600 or so for about a month's worth of treatment. However, I'd say about 75, probably close to 80% of our kids coming through have some type of Medicaid services in place, so it comes at no cost to the youth. We certainly don't get reimbursed that full fee, but not going to turn kids away just because of their inability to pay. So certainly something that we work with families on to make sure that they get the level of care and the services that they require.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Dr. Voth, there's a lot of talk about marijuana as medicine. I have a feeling that you may have an opinion on that and some information you can share with us.
Well, when Michelle asked me to talk, I said, what do I have, an hour and a half? 5 minutes, so this is going to go fast. Keep in mind that the whole medical marijuana argument is intertwined with legalization. Absolutely. A lot of times in many states, it's the same people running that scam. If you look at, and I don't mean to be, you know, biased, but I'm quite biased because I've seen the problems associated with it. I ran a treatment unit for 10 years, et cetera. But if you consider something a medicine, first of all, it's got to be approved by the FDA. Marijuana is not approved. That means you're bypassing all that research, all that proof of efficacy, all that proof of safety. It's gone. So think about the converse. Would you take a pill that someone had not brought through the FDA, proven it was safe, proven it was effective, and would you smoke your cholesterol medicine? No, we don't smoke medicine. So on the first two scores, which are fundamental, how's it approved and what form is it taken, marijuana is not a medicine. Now, there is some talk that there will be maybe movement in the legislature towards something like oils or something else, but once again, it bypasses the FDA, the fundamental processes of bringing things to medicine. Now, as a medicine, you want to know it's safe and effective. We've clearly demonstrated that marijuana is associated with psychotic episodes, violence episodes, interpersonal violence episodes, worsening PTSD. It was thought it might help PTSD. It's been found that through the VA programs, there's an increase in violence and an increase in other drug use in those veterans that are using it for PTSD treatment. You'll see if you've lectured in any of these legislative situations, there's this whole laundry list of things where marijuana is supposed to help. None of them have science behind them, except a little bit for pain and maybe a little bit for MS. And there's only one type of pain that maybe THC might be helpful in. I would remind you, THC is available as a prescription. Anybody in this room could come to me and ask for it, and if I felt it was appropriate, I could write that prescription for THC, that's Marinol. CBD is now available in a medical form. There is also a mix that's been very carefully researched called Sativex. Those things are going through the legitimate process. And there is no reason to then sort of allow this marijuana magic to just magically come onto the scene. They're going to say, well, 37 states have done this, and we need to catch up. And I'd say that's baloney. 37 states have taken a very misguided approach to this, and we need to stand firm. And, you know, so what if we're the last? Gee, would you like to be the last one that falls off the cliff? I think maybe so. Maybe you'd learn from all the other foolish maneuvers and step back and say, wow, they're really having problems. And they are. If you look at what's going on in Colorado, California, Washington State, et cetera, there's now evidence that marijuana use and the legalization or medical use being legalized is associated with states that have a 23% higher opiate overdose rate. Why is that? Because marijuana use is a fundamental part of that sequence and cycle of drug abuse. It makes total sense. And that data is out there. You'll hear some earlier conflicting data, but the most recent research shows about a 23% increase in opiate deaths. Now, for the next 2 hours, no, I guess about 30 seconds. Big picture, this is going to come up again in the legislature. There's some move to possibly try to bring it in as non-smoked. Again, it is not FDA approved. There is no clear standardization of how you would dose it or what would be allowed. And once again, I think we need to stand firm, be brave, say, yeah, we'll be very happy to be the last one, and y'all just take this and have fun with it. Because if you look around the country, we're seeing huge problems across the country with social difficulties, educational difficulties. Some cities, like for instance Denver, actually having treatment programs in high schools because there's so much use. We don't want that in Kansas, so let's not fall for their games.
Okay, Katie is with KBI, and I've seen Katie at the legislature many times. Katie has a larger perspective about marijuana, both in terms of state law enforcement and the national perspective. So, Katie, I'd ask you to share some of your perspective and the impact on marijuana.
Yeah, thank you for asking me to be here. I'm happy to do it. So Dr. Voth and I have spent several days together at the State House and have had several conversations and discussions about the various impacts of legalization, whether recreationally or commercially. And, you know, there are a host of other reasons that need to be taken into consideration in the context of this discussion and what side of the discussion you may fall on. So I would like to make walk through a couple comments about general public health, public safety implications that cause us to be very, very concerned from law enforcement's perspective about legalization. And then I also want to mention some of these other global issues to try to tie together everything that you've heard here today. So there was reference to potency, and we're talking about smokable products, vegetation versus the edibles with the extracts. The average potency or concentration of THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, the average potency in a smokable joint, let's say 1980, around Woodstock era, was 3%. In 2014, the average potency of THC in plant material had increased to 12%. But we know that people are more often using the extracts and the edibles and less smoking the marijuana. So what does that concentration look like in the extracts and edibles? The concentrates from Colorado have an average potency of over 62%, but they can be found as high as 90%. So if you're using the Woodstock weed as your frame of reference, it doesn't belong in this conversation because the potency levels of the substances that are being used and abused currently are so high that they are causing health implications like you heard the doctors talk about. So I think that that's very important to keep in mind as we go down this path and what's the reality of how this is going to look. In terms of the health, you know, we talked a little bit about is it a medicine, not a medicine. When in states where this has been legalized, either recreationally or medically, they have seen significant increases in admissions to emergency room departments, and a lot of that goes back to accidental overdose. In fact, in Colorado, I think their emergency room admissions for marijuana intoxication tripled. So now we're talking about stressing already stressed systems in terms of healthcare systems, health costs. There really is a trickle-down effect with all of this. In terms of public safety, one of the things that proponents of these types of bills in other states have said is, if we support and allow this to happen legally, then it will drive the black market or illicit market out of the picture. The exact opposite is being true, because what is happening is that there's, everything is supply and demand, and there's overproduction of marijuana. There's a regulatory scheme that allows for growth or production, distribution, but there's also an invitation then for black markets and criminals to exploit the systems that the state is allowed to be put in place. It creates a lot of issues with regulation, inspections of those places, compliance and enforcement, and so there's this mass of legally produced marijuana in some cases that has nowhere to go. So where is it going? It's going to the black market. And now we have drug trafficking organizations that are getting a hold of and selling that extra product, if you will, and using those proceeds to fuel their involvement in other types of major crime. So that's a very real connection, and that's a very real concern for us. Let's speak about crime trends for just a minute. I liked at the beginning of the meeting how both the police department and the sheriff's department talked about crime trends. At the KBI, that's something that we pay attention to every year. And I've been very concerned because in Kansas, over a 4-year period from 2014 to 2018, homicide had raised in this state by 76%. Major violent crime across the board is up. Property crime is up. And so we are already experiencing some real challenges in our state, and a lot of those crimes that are being committed go back to substance use or mental health issues. So in states that have legalized, they've seen those crime rates skyrocket. For example, in Colorado, between 2013 and 2016, their violent crime increased another 18%, property crime another 8%. So that's on what they're already seeing. In Washington, right after they legalized, assaults were up 24%, homicide was up 23%, and human trafficking was up over 600%. Now, a lot of that can be associated with the fact that these growers, international growers, the cartels bring people in to do clandestine field grows, and they're bringing workers, migrant workers in from out of country and basically putting them in a situation of indentured servitude, which is workforce human trafficking. So there's a lot of pieces of this that extend well beyond the conversation of this is just a personal use discussion, because it really is not. Another concern from the public safety perspective is highway safety. There have been research and publications that talk about the increase of marijuana in impaired drivers in accidents, and then the increase in marijuana impaired fatalities. So 27% of daily users admit to driving under the influence of marijuana every day. So think about now these people on the roads and around the people that we love and work with and care for. And you see a stat that shows marijuana impaired traffic deaths increased over 150% in Colorado and over 200% in Washington following legalization. So these are real challenges that we all need to be mindful of and have as a real part of this discussion about whether or not the state wants to go down this path. Some of the other things I wanted to mention to you are impacts beyond what you might think of in a discussion about marijuana legalization. So I was glad to hear somebody else mention impacts about in the educational environment. States where this has been legalized have seen significant increases in drug-related school suspensions, dropout rates, and just think about the impact that has on our children in an environment to receive a good public education. Socially, there have been significant increases in homelessness and increases on dependence on social welfare programs in states that have done this. Also increased needs for substance abuse and mental health services. Now, I think it's important to note that right now in Kansas, there is a pronounced lack of mental health and substance abuse services. They're greatly underfunded. There are significant problems with people having access to those programs. And so this would take us down a path that would further exacerbate that. And we need to be mindful of that. The workforce is also impacted. On average, workplace positivity, so people testing positive for marijuana, increased roughly 50% in all states with legalization. So if you have a workforce where they can't test positive, think about what that's going to do to you now as an employer, or somebody who works in an environment with those safety-sensitive positions. In fact, Colorado is actively recruiting construction workers from other states to try to come in and work because legalization has impacted their workforce so significantly. Those safety-sensitive positions such as pilots, truck drivers, bus drivers, construction workers, they do have to have routine drug tests. So if they fail those, it puts those large industries at risk of losing federal contracts. So now we're talking about true economic impact associated with the legalization. What would that do to our aviation industry in Wichita, for example? What would that do to some of our large construction and trucking industries across the state? So there are real economic impacts that extend well beyond what we've talked about here in terms of public health, public safety, and access to services. I want to end here kind of speaking on the misnomer of cost. You know, I think a lot of the proponents say, well, there's tax dollars associated with this. Michelle mentioned that she saw a billboard here recently. I haven't seen it, but how many billions of dollars could we raise in taxes by doing this? Well, there was a study done at the end of last year that looked at just that in Colorado. And it examined the social and economic consequences of legalization. And what that study found was that for every $1 of tax revenue generated, $4.50 was spent by the state to deal with all of the other issues that I just described, the social and economic impacts. So you're bringing $1 in, you're putting $4.50 out the backside to just try to fix the problem. That needs to be taken out of the conversation, or we need to work hard to make that known as a myth, because that is not where we want to see our state going. There was mention of a piece of legislation. There will be one introduced in Kansas this year. It is being worked on now. It will be modeled after a program in Ohio that doesn't allow for smoking as a method for medical ingestion. Be that as it may, everything I've said about edibles and all the other things, I stand firmly behind. This is a path that we do not want to see our state go down. I hope at the end of this that Kansas is the last one that stands strong, and that if we do that long enough, I truly believe that we will start to see other states repeal the policies that they've put in place because of the failures associated with them. So.
Katie, I'd now like, and to the point about the billboard, I saw this on WWW, Melissa. I don't know where this billboard is, but it says marijuana is a multi-million-dollar industry and Kansas is broke. Fire it up, Kansas. So that's somewhere here in Topeka. At this time, we'd entertain questions of all of the panelists.
You mentioned that students don't think that smoking marijuana is dangerous. Where do you think that is coming from? Is it left over from parents who also abused drugs, but it was not as potent as it is now? Do you think it's just their peers? What do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from the societal shift. You know, I've had students that tell me it's not any different than alcohol or tobacco. I've had students tell me, well, it's becoming legalized in other states, so it can't be bad for you. I think part of that is staying ahead of that education-wise. I think a lot of the students are getting misinformation. They may see things in the media, see that medical marijuana can cure a lot of things. So I think they're getting misinformed on that end. I think some of that even starts with the home. I think sometimes the parents view marijuana as not a big issue, and that it is, you know, legalized in other states. So I see a little bit of that out in the homes.
Thank you. Kevin, you mentioned the cost of per day, per diem. How does that compare to per diem in prison, in jail, in wherever youth are?
Sure, I don't know the numbers or the figures on a jail setting or other private organizations. I can tell you that ACT being at about $9,600 for a month is probably on the low end with regards to the cost of services. And, you know, if you look at some other private organizations across, I know I have some families that will send kids off to Utah, down to Texas, and they talk upwards of spending $40,000 to $50,000. So I had a young man that came into my facility. He had spent 2 times in a Utah setting and once in Tennessee, and the family informed me that they were now $120,000 in debt for his drug treatment programs. Now, he came to our program, and he's now about almost 12 months sober. Not that we did anything special beyond what they were doing, but, you know, as the course of treatment goes on, it does take multiple times in treatment for folks. This was just his time, and so from a cost analysis perspective, we are probably on the lower end versus more of a private organization.
Anybody else?
I'm a bit reluctant to ask this, but I'm going to anyway. I've been known to do that. Who are the most legislation have proponents and those who oppose? Who are the prominent legislators who are promoting legalization, and who are those who are against legalization? Anybody? I'm asking for contacts for us to advocate one way or another.
I think Holscher's the only one I'm familiar with.
Yeah, and the Kansas City guy I'm blanking on.
Yeah, there was a bill. I will get some information to Michelle for you on that. And I appreciate the question, because I really think that, you know, not everybody in the general public is as educated as what you all in this room are now about this issue. It's an issue that we've been studying beyond the context of our roles as doctor, law enforcement. We're looking at everything in the broad context. What's going to change this conversation is people like you hearing these messages, doing your own research, talking to other people, encouraging them to do their own research. Because I think that if the voter base of Kansas really knew everything that we have just talked about, I don't think that there would be this level of, you know, assumed support for this. So in contacting legislators is a great way to express the concerns that you have, and ask them to be mindful and to study the issue before they cast a vote. So I'll get a list of those people to Michelle.
Well, thank you all.
Max, I'd also say that there's been a change. I mean, there was kind of a nucleus of kind of pro-pot, liberal kind of folks for a number of years, and I think that they've kind of brought some of the other, even more conservative folks online, thinking this is going to be some great financial windfall. And that worries me, because then they don't really know the issue. They're thinking they're going to make a lot of money on it, but that really doesn't necessarily pan out. And gosh, if you look at Colorado, I mean, they spend an inordinate amount of money on all the social things that have happened. I worry about that. I also worry about the fact that there is a lot of like big tobacco, big marijuana now, dumping money into campaigns. And I haven't had a chance to do it because I'm a little busy in my professional life, but I'd love to look at every single co-sponsor and look at where their donations are coming from. I can't say that I've proven that fact, but I'm highly suspicious that some of the folks that have not typically been supporting all of a sudden jump on. I'd like to know why. And they'll tell me, oh, it's my constituents. Well, if 3 people make a lot of noise and there's 30,000 that make no noise, who is it that gets listened to? Absolutely. And I think that's a problem, and they need to hear. I know some legislators I've considered very reasonable folks thinking, well, we're walking away from all this money. It's like, wow, how about I rob a bank, is that okay then? And they, well, but that's different. Well, show me why it's different. It's my kids getting involved in this, so.
We're seeing it pan out on legalized gambling as well. These issues sometimes displace morals.
Tom?
I got a good teacher voice.
Yeah, you do.
Katie, I would ask you, because an interesting thought, and I won't talk so loudly, that essentially a negative return on investment. $1 collected costs $4.50 in services. Do you have numbers for that for tobacco use and alcohol use?
I don't, no.
Because I would suspect there's probably some similarities.
Well, absolutely, and I love that argument because it's like, okay, sure, 400,000 tobacco deaths every year, right, 150,000 alcohol deaths every year, billions upon billions in net cost to the world, and to the country. And I don't see anybody running those numbers on marijuana alone, but on drug addiction, certainly you see very similar numbers. And those are legal drugs. Holy cow.
Are there any states where the consequences have publicly regretted their decision that we know of?
I think Colorado falls nicely in line. They do a Colorado impact assessment, and there have been mayors in Colorado that have written public letters saying this was a mistake. Don't go down this path. You were going to add something to
I was going to say Colorado.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff comes out of there, and I guess it's maybe because they're watching it so closely, but there's just a constant flow of, oh my God, information, like the contaminants that have been found in marijuana, contaminants even in CBD, seizures in kids that were told they were getting pure CBD, but they weren't getting pure CBD, it was adulterated with THC. A lot coming out of there. And the felony rate has increased in Denver 57% since they have started allowing legal pot. And I don't remember the exact statistic, but most of it was from folks from out of state coming and then, bringing crime with them.
Other questions? Sure. Okay.
Do we have any statistics on the cost that it's cost Kansas for Colorado's legalization? Because I know that patrols along the highways have increased and arrests have increased. Is there anything, and I'm sure that's something that the proponents are probably talking about too, that we could save money by not spending that money.
Yeah, good question. So I don't know if there is an impact assessment that was done 2 years ago, I believe, because we were in Kansas trying to study the effect that Colorado's legalization was having on Kansas, especially in those border counties, and what the impact was in terms of those legal materials coming out of Colorado into Kansas then illegally. There is a report on the Attorney General's website that talks about, with the best data that we have available in the state right now, some of the impact of Colorado's legalization on Kansas, but it's mostly in terms of access and what law enforcement is seeing in terms of, sourcing of locations, where coming from, going to. So maybe not specifically answer your question in terms of cost, but there is some information out there about the impact.
Are there any other comment? Oh, here, John.
As a layman, I'm curious why there is such an effort against the marijuana when alcohol, cigarettes, domestic violence, and other issues would appear to have a far greater social impact and impact on health and so on than what I'm hearing about marijuana. Now, that's not an advocacy necessarily for the marijuana. It's an issue of priorities as to where our efforts are put, both financially and legally, and so on.
You know, one of the best pieces of data comes out of the Monitoring the Future study. And if you look at adolescent use of tobacco and alcohol, both illegal for adolescents, it's drastically higher than marijuana, where marijuana is not legal for parents and alcohol and tobacco are legal for parents. All of it's illegal for kids. Legal status has a huge impact on what people are going to use, particularly impressionable young people. I think people have taken absolute for granted for years that pot's just no big deal. You sit around and mellow out and, you know, listen to Crosby, Stills, Nash, and life's good, and we go to work the next day. And that's actually absolutely not true. I mean, we're seeing now clear increases in domestic violence, interpersonal violence, dating violence, criminal violence. I am highly suspicious, and I don't have the data behind this, but I am highly suspicious that a lot of these young shooters that go shoot up schools and they're young, I'd love to know the drug screens on every single one of them. Many of them have known drug abuse histories and known marijuana histories. The guy that shot Chris Kyle, you know, went out and got stoned on pot the night before and was psychotic when he shot Chris Kyle. So I think we haven't even seen the beginning of the tidal wave yet. We know there's a lot of stuff out there, but we haven't really dug into some areas that we need to dig into.
I work in close associations with the Juvenile Detention Center in Johnson County, and I don't have the exact figures, but I know that I've been doing some presentations with the assistant DA, and the number of youth that are now in the detention center with felony gun and distribution charges, gun possessions, has skyrocketed. For a while, the detention center was averaging probably around 16 to 17 kids in the facility, and lately they've been up in the 30s. And many of those kids are felony drug and gun charges. And what's happening is you get me a 17-year-old that goes onto Snapchat, sends a message out to all these kids saying, hey, I've got carts on me, $20 a piece. Those kids show up to that drug dealer, and that drug dealer has a gun on them, and he robs the kids of all their money. So we have a lot of drug deals gone bad right now in Johnson County, resulting in homicides and deaths and murders. So that in itself, as we start to look at you know, the availability of marijuana with youth, and then we start looking closer at their the impact it's having on their IQ and lower IQ scores, their attention, their memory, their ability to manage and monitor their, or I guess regulate their own moods. We're getting more and more aggressive kids out there with access to guns and are shooting each other up. So we're starting already to see some of the negative impacts of marijuana's social acceptance, per se.
I might just follow up on your question, since it was a question about marijuana versus alcohol. You know, that's something that we've heard at the legislature quite a bit, and they're not the same. From the scientific perspective of it, alcohol is a water-soluble substance. THC is a fat-soluble substance. So the difference in that, we in Kansas have a 0.08 per se limit for drunk driving. That limit metabolizes out of your system at a pretty defined rate because alcohol is a water-soluble substance. So it's easy to set a threshold to say if you're above this, it's illegal, you're impaired, and we know that you're going to metabolize it at a prescribed rate. It's not the same with THC because it's a fat-soluble substance, so it stays in your cells, it stays in your system for quite some time. It depends on the use. So we can't say if you have a 5 nanogram per milliliter of THC that's considered intoxicating, because for somebody that smokes every single day, 5 milliliters might be nothing to them, whereas to somebody who's never smoked before, that 5 would be intoxicating. So there are a lot of reasons that alcohol and marijuana can't be treated differently in terms of per se driving limits and then the life of the metabolism afterwards.
Well, I guess I still have the question of priorities in terms of social and legislative policy. Prohibition didn't stop consumption of alcohol. You know, even raising the amount of money that a pack of cigarettes costs has not nearly been as effective. And I'm wondering what, you know, we're anxious about the consumption of any, what I talk about is everybody will pick their own poison. And the question for me is, why are we becoming so determined that we want to eradicate marijuana when most of the social and economic policies of other poisons have not worked?
Let me address that. In fact, during Prohibition, we had the lowest rates of psychotic episodes and alcohol-related psychoses and problems ever during that period of time. The other thing is that alcohol was legal and consumable and integrated into society, you know, from well before Prohibition. And you know, so it was integrated into society, and we tried to take it away from society. And that was a fundamental mistake because, you know, then people had this legal thing that then all of a sudden was taken away. Marijuana is not legal, hadn't been legal, and it's one of those things that right now we will lose that ability to say, wait a minute, this is illegal, don't use it. So there's a big fundamental difference there. I would totally agree with you that tobacco and alcohol are huge, gigantic health disasters. Absolutely. But why would I, as a healthcare person, want to add yet another disaster to that rather than hold that back and say, let's do everything we can to try to minimize it, reduce it, discourage it, try to get people not using it. And I'll turn right around and say, let's go after youth targeted alcohol, for instance. I mean, I think that's something that ought to be just really gone after, and try to work on youth access to tobacco. I mean, tobacco is, you know, anybody that's come to me as a patient would know, you know, that is my number one because it's killing so many people. But I don't want to add to that. We've got a lot of problems as it is. Why add to it?
Question for Kevin. So you mentioned carts. I'm assuming that's the cartridges for vaping. I'm kind of naive here.
Sure.
So with all of the deaths that were in the news from vaping, and I thought some of them were linked to marijuana in the vapes, has this not affected the usage by kids?
They're aware of it. They will even kind of cite, they can tell you that, oh, I heard it was vitamin E acetate that was inside of these THC cartridges. They can, you know, regurgitate the information to you. However, we're dealing with a population of youth who are indestructible, that it won't happen to them. They feel like they always fall outside of that percentage or those figures. So they will continue to use these products. They will tell me that they have the same source that they go to time and time again. They know it's pure. They know that the substance or the product that they're using hasn't been contaminated. It didn't come from Mexico. It didn't come from China. They don't know that information. but they will continue to roll the dice on this, believing that the products that they are using are a safer alternative. And they will start to quote how there's no carcinogens and that it's not a burned product and that this is a safer alternative to using whether it's nicotine or THC, that because it's vaporizing. They don't have the facts and the figures. They don't know the internal components or the products that are available inside of these substances. So they lack information, while at the same time they will boast the information that they do know. So you will hear kids talking about the fact that they're no longer going to do it because of the harm or the risk, but they continue to use cartridges. They continue to buy these concentrate products that they have very limited knowledge about.
Hold on just a minute.
Many of the conversations that we've had have spoke about government at large, or the state as a whole, and the cost dollars. But even as an employee or a person on the street, the thing that we start talking about with private businesses is insurance contributions, a percentage that we pay in for a cost. If I'm a tobacco user, have high alcohol consumption, then the cost for me and my place of employment has to go up for the cost of insurance to cover an employee. Have we noticed a significant change in private business from prior to marijuana till after marijuana in the cost per business for contributions?
So there is some information out there from a national organization called Smart Approaches to Marijuana, and they do go through a lot of the topic that I talked about today. They've got some criminal justice information, some health information. That's probably the best source of information that I've seen so far that talks about some of those workplace considerations and cost to employers. Because there's, they do talk about testing. There's policies that are going to have to be made and decided for agencies. What is your policy going to be on drug testing? What is your policy going to be if you have a person who is a medical card holder and they test positive? Are you going to, so there's a lot of workplace considerations. There is some information on their website also about the costs of healthcare generally going up because with legalization, not only general healthcare, but also Medicaid and Medicare costs as well, because as you said, for the same reasons for tobacco, alcohol use, those premiums do go up because of all of the negative health consequences associated with marijuana. So that's probably the best source of information that I could think to direct you to for more specific questions.
Any other questions? I like to note on your table there are blue sheets of paper. The information from there is from National Institute of Drug Abuse, and that is another good source of information related to marijuana or any other substances. In addition, every table has some advertisement. And I have a brother, my husband has a brother that live in Colorado. And so these are just some of the ads that my brother sends me things. So this is kind of what you see in Colorado, a state that has legalization. So it's everywhere. Just wanted to give you a frame of reference of what you will be seeing if that does come here. I want to thank, if the panelists have any other last thinking comments that you haven't made or would like to.
I would just want to say thank you, and thank you to all of you being here for the opportunity for us to have this conversation. I think that these types of town hall, grassroots conversations on this topic need to be happening more and in more parts of the state because these are the conversations that are going to have the biggest impact in terms of what happens to the future of our state. So just want to thank you all for the opportunity.
I was going to make reference as they were holding up some of the advertisements. I saw the 420 one that was standing that they were holding up. There's a new number out there, and you may not be familiar with it. I keep educating folks on, and that's 710. And 710 is when you flip 710 upside down, it says oil, and that's representation for when you start using oil cartridges and a different way of smoking weed. So if you have your own children, or if you're working in an organization where there are youth, and you hear them saying, "Oh, it's 710." There's a drug connotation to that. So just be mindful of how the marijuana game is changing constantly, that it's becoming more digital. And as you look at these devices that they're using, some of these devices are Bluetooth compatible, and they're able to use their phones to control the amount of ohms and the heat production used on these devices. So we're leaving this analog generation of smoking a blunt or a joint or a bowl and going into the vape industry. And so there's a lot of money to be had from the vape industry. And you look at even the Juul organization, they're a sister company from PAX, the PAX era, and that's an oil-based marijuana product. So very closely linked. There's no, it wasn't by mistake that Juul kind of hit this market real hard with adolescents, and that kids liked using that Juul device. So there's all these intertwined organizations working hard to get the hands on a younger generation of users and to get them addicted at an early age so that they have a lifelong user in them. So.
I wanted to say too, both Katie and I know Eric and Dr. Voth have been at the legislature, and usually it's about 3 or 4 people that are on one side and the pro are on the other side. And the legislators really are hearing from the pro side. So wherever you are, if you have, the more you learn, the more it's important to educate others. And I would just say one thing that PARS does is we do offer, Lynn does a lot of presentations to schools trying to dispel some of the myths with youth, but if you're interested in a presentation, give us a call. The other thing is, and Judy mentioned this earlier, our grants really depend on responses from you all, so we would appreciate you filling out the yellow forms and giving us a call if you want more information, or if you have questions that we can try to, if we can't answer, we'll help find the answer for you. So thank you for the panel. I appreciate your coming, and I'd like to give a round of applause to everybody else.
Thanks for being here.
And I guess if there is more information, email us. We'll try to get something to you, and thanks, and have a great afternoon.
Yeah, because I was there doing it for the CAP organization.